and welcome once again to the India Today Conclave, to a very special session that we have, Bulls in Our Memory Shop, debating heritage, history, and hubris. Rather intriguingly titled, but let me try and decode it in a way which is perhaps a little simpler. We live, ladies and gentlemen, in an age of contested legacies of historical figures. We are rewriting, reclaiming, reinterpreting history in a manner that only seems to further polarize society today. Is there a way forward where we can bring together an objective rendition of our history without breeding sharp social and political divisions? That's what we want to address today. And we have two eminent speakers who hopefully will try and demystify this topic for us. Vikram Sampath is the author of a two-part biography of Savarkar. The second part is just out. Historian and author. Dr. Vikram Sampath is joined by Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who is not just a politician, but I think at times would rather be first described as a Sahitya Akademi Award winner for his writing, including his most recent book, which looks at the issue of nationalism. So thank you both very much for joining us. And Shashi, let's kick it off straight with you by asking this question, which is often being asked: what are these fundamental fault lines that underlie contemporary history debates, history writing today? Is it Nehruvians versus the Hindutvavadis? Is it left versus right? Is it constitutionalists versus those who see an India that stretches into antiquity? What really defines the history debate today?
I think what's happened, Rajdeep, is that what has opened up in the last few years with the ascent of Moditva, if you like, Hindutva plus the personality cult of Mr. Modi in power and the followers they both attract. What has changed, I think, is that an issue which many of us grew up assuming had been long settled has now reopened fundamentally. And that goes back to the founding of the Republic, the moment of partition, because partition didn't happen, as you remember, the split in the nationalist movement didn't happen over ideology. It wasn't Marxist versus capitalist. It didn't happen over geography. It wasn't North versus South. It happened on one key question. The question was, is religion the determinant of our nationhood? And those who argued that, yes, religion was their identity and that made them a nation, they left and they created Pakistan. And everyone else who remained pretty much of any consequence, starting with Mahatma Gandhi, embracing Nehru, Maulana Azad, Sardar Patel, Rajendra Prasad, the works, they all said, no, our freedom struggle was for everyone. And of course, Dr. Ambedkar then enshrined this in a constitution debated over 2.5 years before being adopted, which enshrined that principle that India will be a secular, pluralistic state with room for everyone, irrespective of what their color of skin was, what the language they spoke at home, what religion they had or chose to worship, what caste they belonged to, that as long as they were citizens of this republic, everyone would be equal. Now, that fundamental idea was, I think, core to the evolution of Indian politics for the next 6 decades plus. And now we have a different ethos in power, which argues that no, India is fundamentally a Hindu country, and that everybody else here is either a guest or an interloper, and that the institutions of the state, the laws of the state, the practices of the state must reflect an allegiance to a certain cultural, civilizational understanding of India, which has nothing to do with the idea of India enshrined in the Constitution. And that, I think, is the fundamental fault line, because it is, people keep saying, no one gave you the right to have your own idea of India. My answer is, I'm afraid my idea of India is the idea in the Constitution. Where does yours come from?
You want to answer that? Where does yours come from? The suggestion that Shashi Tharoor is making is that the fundamental fault line lies in how we, in a way, identify ourselves as Indians. Do we identify ourselves in India through the Constitution, or do we identify ourselves through religious identity?
Rajdeep, as a non-politician and as a historian, I'd like to answer it from that perspective. that, we might be politically independent, but I think our minds are far from decolonized. Particularly this finds its manifestation in scholarship, in historiography, where we've very, very faithfully been adherents of that infamous Macaulay's Minute of 1835, that the whole role of education is to create a class of people who are interpreters, who are only in color and blood Indian, but in our morals, opinions, tastes, and intellect, we are English. And this manifests, it's probably most germane in the way history is written in India. And I'm not making it political at all. The first.
No, you're
brush,
welcome. You're welcome to make it political. It is political. Let's be honest.
So the first brush that a young Indian will have with the history of her country is the textbooks. And what does she see there? The story of her country is almost shown in third person as though it belongs to some other nation. While it's not my case to argue that the role of history or historians is to generate pride and hysteria and jingoism and all of that, the converse also holds, that to denigrate your past, to feel a constant sense of apologia about it, I think that's been the bane of historiography, because sadly, even at the heights of the British Raj, you had space for nationalist historians, Jadunath Sarkar, Radha Kumud Mukherjee, R.C. Majumdar, V.K. Rajwade, so many of them, Bhandarkar, C.V. Vaidya. But then sadly, post-independence, and I think the Congress party unwittingly gave away that space of historiography to the stranglehold of Marxist historians. And in a discipline like this, which thrives on multiplicity of views, which thrives on dissent, discussion, debate, differences of opinion, healthy discussions, I think the thraldom with which academic historiography, I'm talking of, which has been largely controlled by a clique of what we would call as leftist historians, I think it's distorted history and created several fault lines. I'll just state one or two. The story of India is a story of invaders. From their perspective, we've not reclaimed that. So a young person, again, who reads the story of India, it's a long litany of invasions, starting from that myth of the Aryan invasion theory, to a series of battles that we have lost. We're a nation of losers, it seems, to most people. That the very fact that we are around as a civilization shows there must have been some battles we also won, and the resistance that was put, which is curiously underplayed or subjugated in our history books. The other thing, we are sitting in Delhi, but the historiography of India is extremely Delhi-centric. Both of us come from below the Vindhyas. I think stories from our part of the country don't find mention as much as some obscure dynasties which are bigoted, Lodhis and Khiljis find incommensurate mention in books. The Vijayanagar Empire or the Chola Empire, the Rashtrakutas, Satavahanas, Pallavas, the Travancore rulers, the Mysore Wadeyars, the Ahoms of Northeast, the Nagas, Tripuris, the rulers of Manipur. I think India needs to reclaim her history from Delhi. And these are these constant battles that keep happening in historiography, and also, a refusal to acknowledge the darker elements, the darker aspects of Indian history, particularly medieval India with Islamic invasions, trying to brush that under the carpet. American historian Will Durant had called the Islamic invasion of India as the bloodiest chapter of human history. But does that find a mention in our books in the way it should? We labor under this false assumption that talking about the truth will upset contemporary social issues. But dare I say that national unity or social cohesion cannot stand, the edifice of national unity or social cohesion cannot stand on the shaky and false foundations of whitewashed history. So face the truth in the eye. History worldwide offers these spaces to heal, to relive the past, get over it, make peace with it, move on. I think we've not done that. And that is one reason these battles keep happening, what we saw in Ayodhya, what we keep seeing all the time, these renaming of cities. These are a manifestation of that same idea that somehow someone is going to feel bad if you speak the truth. And so we need to push all the muck under the carpet and put deodorant. At some point, the stink will show up. And that's what is happening.
With Vikram.
Basically, Vikram wants India to reclaim its history from Delhi, from Macaulay's children,
there I'm with
from those who in the Nehruvian age, he believes, whitewashed history. and didn't tell the little subaltern histories. I could add a number of other names, Suhail Dev, who took on, the Ghazdis. There are many others whose names come out. Is that true somewhere? Or do you believe he's taking an extreme position and going to the extent where now I read Maharana Pratap actually defeated Akbar in the Battle of Haldigadi, which is a plain lie, but it suits a particular form of history writing.
So this is precise. I'm with Vikram halfway. That is, much of what he said in the first half of his response, I agree totally with, and I have myself in my own way expressed the same concern that there's a whole lot of Indian history we've not been able to reclaim. I studied in Bombay, Calcutta, and Delhi, and I didn't learn a line about the Vijayanagar Empire, and even less about the Cholas, the Pallavas, and so on. Whereas, as Vikram points out, the smallest dynasties in Delhi, we learned by heart their dates. So there is certainly a Delhi-centric vision of Indian history teaching. But on the last part of what Vikram said, I have a profound disagreement. I think that what we have to look at is that when we came to independence, we really did not choose to be a mirror image of Pakistan. Pakistan used history to forge this rather intolerant idea. I've met Pakistanis who are horrified to realize that the history they read, there is even an excellent book by a Pakistani historian comparing the history that was taught in Indian schools up to the 70s and what was taught in Pakistani schools. Where in Pakistan it was all about hatred of Hindus, the glorious 5,000-year history of Islam in India, etc., etc., and essentially a denial of any syncretism. Whereas in India, history, and I know you don't fully approve of this, but history was pressed into the nation-building project, in the service of nation-building. And so there was a desire to elide over some of the more unpleasant details, destruction of temples, some of the horrors that happened, while at the same time stressing on the commonalities, the cooperation, the harmony that also featured throughout the same periods. And I think that was a laudable objective in a country like ours. First of all, unlike Pakistan, we were a democracy. Second, unlike Pakistan, we were a much more pluralistic society. We had to knit together people of various differences. And we didn't feel, I think, I shouldn't say we, I was a kid myself at the time, the nation didn't feel that accentuating remembered divisions would have been the right way to go if you're knitting a nation together. And to my mind, that was actually the right choice. Today what's happening is we are scratching at wounds that had actually healed. And you're reopening and fresh sort of drops of blood are emerging from scars that should have been allowed to heal. Let sleeping dogmas lie would have been my preferred option. But unfortunately, this is where we're going.
That might have been the case, Dr. Tharoor, I think, in the immediate decades after independence. But I think, have the wounds really healed? That's also the question. This, as I said...
Are we allowing them to heal, Vikram?
Well, I mean, sometimes just talking the truth, Ubuntu and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which South Africa did, of course, the victims and perpetrators, they were alive, and so they could come face to face. But I think it's a civilizational wound and a civilizational victim. I'll just give one example. I mean, we were the greatest universities in the world, the Oxfords and Princetons of the world in Vikramshila, Takshashila, Nalanda. And when Nalanda was, vandalized, books burned for 1 year, they say. There was so much of manuscripts and books by this bigoted Bakhtiyar Khilji. Today, if you go out of Nalanda, the ruins, the town is Bakhtiyarpur. The station there is Bakhtiyarpur station. In which country of the world will a person who actually desecrated your temple of knowledge be actually valorized? And also, by doing this, I think somewhere we're putting the albatross of these invasions on the neck of a young Indian Muslim man or woman who is not responsible for the invasions of Ghazni, Gori, Aurangzeb, and Tipu Sultan and all these. If, like in the morning, Mr. Arif Muhammad Khan was telling you, Rajdeep, that a Muslim need not represent a Muslim in parliament or assemblies. Similarly, you need not have an icon created for the community who belongs to the same community. You can have anybody else. But even if you want to have, Muslim icons for the community, you have a range of others from Rahim to Kabir to Raskhan to Sant Shishunal Sharif to APJ Abdul Kalam to Mr. Arif Muhammad Khan. There's so many others. Why would you assume that talking about the atrocities of Aurangzeb or Tipu Sultan Khan or Ghazni is going to make the Indian Muslim feel very, bad about. Just 2 days back, you had Anas Haqqani who put out a tweet celebrating the fact that, they went to the shrine of the Mazar of Ghazni, Mahmud Ghazni, and also gloated over the fact that he crushed the Somnath idol. So are we not doing, in some way, putting that same seed of, separatism that we are trying to whitewash these invaders only so that you feel nice and you feel integrated into the society? I don't think that.
Is it about whitewashing or is it about demonization? The moment a road is named after Aurangzeb or, you've got a city like Aurangabad, immediately remove it. So you're moving from whitewashing history, as you call it whitewashing that was going on, to now deliberately looking for those figures through whom you can demonize a community. So we seem to be moving from one extreme to the other extreme.
should the
And
community
Vikram,
get
one
demonized?
second on that one, because it's a very important point. When this thuggish group called the Hindu Sena recently defaced some road signs, it was no longer about what a particular ruler did, right? So you want Aurangzeb Road renamed for the same reason you'd want Bakhtiarpur renamed, and I understand that. But Akbar, I mean, there couldn't have been a greater example of the kind of ideal king in that particular period of time. And his was defaced, so the only thing that mattered is that he was Muslim. So they came and defaced the signs for Akbar Road. And I said, well, what do they even understand about history? What are they doing? So when you ask, rightly, why is today's Muslim feeling offended when Ghazni or Ghori are denounced? The answer is because it is instrumentalized to demonize them today. You talk to Muslims who have absolutely no affinity for Ghazni or Ghori, but they're the ones being aggressed. After all, when some poor fellow is walking down the street and he's beaten within an inch of his life and told to say Jai Shri Ram, that's not my Hindu dharma, Vikram. And that's also not what building a democratic society in India can possibly be about.
Which is why I said I think the wounds haven't healed, and it's so easy to bring these out. So a truth and reconciliation commission where we set all this, as I said, world over, history offers these spaces where people can talk these uncomfortable truths, heal from it, learn from past mistakes, and move on. I think we have not made peace with our past, and that is why it keeps resurfacing every now and then as a cancerous growth from
No,
the
but
body
whose
politic.
truth? Whose truth? The question is whose truth? Let's take a look at Savarkar, for example, who is now being reclaimed in a way, after having been possibly demonized by the Congress Nehruvian elite when you all were in power. Who decides who is the real Savarkar? Is the Savarkar the freedom fighter, as some would like to see him? Or is he a Hindutvavadi leader? Is he someone who called Gaurakshaks fools and spoke out against untouchability? Or is he this iconoclastic figure who has to be only seen as an anti-Muslim leader? Whose truth? Shashi Tharoor's truth? Vikram Sampath's truth? Whose truth?
My truth is a combination of all that you said, Rajdeep,
no,
because these are complex figures. They are a bit of all of that.
But the truth is our politicians reduce them to black and white caricatures.
No, I think in all fairness, Vikram has done a good job of trying to draw in his 2 volumes, and rather hefty volumes, we've
Yes.
seen them, a very complex portrait in which he has been, some would say, very generous to the first half of Savarkar's life and perhaps not critical enough of the second half. But he's painted it all, it's all there. And though I haven't read every single word because that would take a year of both volumes, I have dipped into it, and it's a terrific work in terms of trying to reclaim for today's generation a person who, as you say, has only been depicted in one
Yes.
total caricature as this great nationalist hero, or perhaps total caricature as this craven supplicant for British mercy, who then essentially lived on a British pension for many years afterwards. And these 2 contrasting images mean that for some of us, it was very difficult to understand why Savarkar's portrait should be in Parliament at all, and that too opposite that of Mahatma Gandhi. Whereas what Vikram has depicted, particularly the early years, up to about the time that he gets sent off to the Andamans, to that cellular jail, which I have visited, and it's certainly not a salubrious place. Up to that time, he was really a hero. As somebody, I think it was Manu Pillai in his review of Vikram's book, said if like Bhagat Singh, he had been hanged instead of sent off to exile and survived, might we not be hailing him today as a hero like Bhagat Singh? It's the subsequent year, the
No, but look at
invention of
Bhagat Singh.
Hindutva philosophy and the bigotry he showed, the involvement in mentoring Nathuram Godse and up there, all of these things that have cast a shadow over what Savarkar represents.
No, but can you look at these figures who've traversed, decades as complex figures, or do we tend to look at them as black and white figures? Even Bhagat Singh. Let's be honest, Bhagat Singh was never close to anything remotely connected to Hindutvavadi politics. And yet today,
He was a
Rajdeep,
communist.
he was a
He's
communist.
convinced
He was a
Factual
communist, but
correction.
today,
Fact
but
check.
today,
Fact check.
but today Bhagat Singh is appropriated by the Indian right. Subhash Chandra Bose, who was a socialist, is appropriated by the Indian right. Mahatma Gandhi, you appropriate, and you appropriate Savarkar, both together. You want to appropriate every leader? Then give the truth.
I don't know who is you here because, as I said, I don't belong to any political party, fortunately.
You've been positioned at the right of the stage.
That's by design,
I'm
by
happy
you.
to be the centrist.
No, but go ahead.
But see, there are many facets to a person like Savarkar, who's very, very complicated figure. I've dealt in detail about those so-called petitions, that they were not mercy petitions, that these pension that he was receiving is something that that many other revolutionaries whose degrees was taken away were given by the British. The very fact that the British never trusted him, if he had become a stooge, they would have co-opted him. He was a very useful fellow who was trained in law in London. He would have been a part of the Viceroy's Council. Now, from a 5-year captivity in Ratnagiri after his release from Andamans, every time his petition came up for a review, the British said, we don't trust this man, because he had these underground networks with Bhagat Singh, with Chandrasekhar Azad, with Durga Bhabhi, with Sachindranath Sanyal, Raj Bihari Bose, all of them. So from 5 years, the term actually ended to 13 long years. That itself showed that the British never trusted him, and he was not a stooge as is made out to be. And also his role in the assassination of Gandhiji, time and time again, the courts have honorably exonerated him. And when the highest court, the Supreme Court, exonerates someone, I think for political purposes, it is unfair to keep on putting that albatross on him. But be that as it...
There's a new book out that does exactly that with new research.
Well, maybe.
With,
but then,
by
sir,
Apu
Dr.
Suresh.
Tharoor, for 1.5 years, the Supreme Court appointed an amicus curiae, and someone of the stature of Justice Bobde, the former CJI, and Justice Nageshwar Rao went through the Mahatma Gandhi trial papers, the Justice Jivanlal Kapoor Commission report, and gave out a statement in 2018, just 3 years ago, that Savarkar's role in Gandhiji's assassination is not something that is up for review, and the courts have settled it. So I think somewhere we should put, dogs to sleep there, as you said. But, the fact, Rajdeep, is have these discussions. Today we are able to have this mainstream discussion on Savarkar. But in the 50s and 60s, I keep talking about this several times, someone of the eminence of Pandit Hridaynath Mangeshkar, who was in All India Radio. Savarkar was also a prolific Marathi poet. He wrote extensively in Marathi, Sagara, Pran, Talmalala, and Jayostute, and all of that. So this poem which he tuned, Sagara, Pran, Talmalala, which Lataji, Ashaji, others sang, for which he got a show cause notice, asking, why have you tuned this man's, why have you tuned this? And Mangeshkarji gave this 2-line reply saying, good poet, good poem. Reason enough to tune, but he lost his job for doing this. So you make someone a persona non grata, you don't even have a discussion on that person, and we talk of intolerance today. So, this culture, cancel culture of anybody who doesn't fall in this mainstream narrative is a traitor, doesn't belong to the nationhood. I think that is a very problematic piece. And Bhagat Singh too, Bhagat Singh published Savarkar's book on 1857, the 4th edition. In his jail diaries, the Hindu Pad Padashahi of Savarkar are noted down extensively. He's written eulogizing articles on Savarkar in the Matwala newspaper that Bhagat Singh brought out. So this connections between the revolutionaries, I think, is so understudied. That's another fault line in our history, where we have a very simplistic, linear, monochromatic narrative, a Richard Attenborough film of how India won her freedom. I think there are multiple stories, multiple narratives, multiple heroes and heroines, and the time has come in this Amrit Mahotsav that we kind of revisit those other voices and other, which are dying to be, I think, told and heard.
Respond to that, Dr. Tharoor, that the years of the Congressification of our history, when the Marxists sort of, in a way, dictated what our history should be, is where distortion and, dare I say, intolerance also crept in. That there was an unwillingness to read possibly other multiple versions that perhaps existed of these same complex figures. For the longest time, even Bose was never really done justice in a way by the so-called Congress historians of the 50s and 60s.
Well, I'm not sure that it's fair in a thriving democracy to imply that every historian followed a particular line dictated by the ruling party. I don't believe that was true. I think that, in fact, in some ways, some of the critiques of the Congress from the left were actually even sharper than perhaps what today we're seeing from the right. So I don't think it was a monochromatic approach. Having said that, I'm not going to speak in favor of intolerance. I wasn't aware of this episode of Pandit Hridaynath Mangeshkar, and I feel sorry that such a choice should have been made. No one is defending any of the excesses of the past, but this whataboutery is not a way of responding seriously to a discussion about today and tomorrow. You know, you talk about 2002 riots in Gujarat, what about 1984? Both were bad, yeah, but let's not acknowledge they were both bad, and let's talk about how do we prevent either from happening in 2021. That's the way in which we have to look at history if you are interested in building a modern, progressive, democratic nation.
You're saying there's no space for whataboutery in our history
that's
debate.
Cheap debating, point scoring, you know. What about this, what about that? Okay, we are censoring people now, you censored people ago. We are arresting people now, you are arresting the emergency. Those arguments are not what the country ought to be about. They're not about what we should aspire to as Indians to see in our country. I am all for reclaiming forgotten voices, as Vikram says, on all sides, I might add. And I think that one of the very important things that you're overlooking in the slight demonization of Congress-era history writing is the very fact that people like Bhagat Singh, Netaji Bose and others were honored, maybe insufficiently according to some, were honored sufficiently that today we still speak of them with reverence. And these are people who obviously were demonized by the Brits up to 1947. And when you look at the fact that of course, Netaji has lots of roads and stadia and so on named after him everywhere. Bhagat Singh is an icon that everyone honors today. People don't realize he died in his early 20s. He was hanged at 21 or 22. And yet today he is one of the best known Punjabis of all time in India, and somebody who is revered, rightly so, for the extraordinary intellect he had and the contribution he made to articulating India's aspirations for freedom. So it's not as if there was only one narrative. But let's agree, let's concede the point we need to allow other voices to come forward. What are these voices saying? And that's where I want to, if the voices are saying, you know, Muslims were bad 500 years ago, and therefore today's Muslims will have to suffer for it, and we will do this and we will do that, and we will change this and we'll change that, then I have a problem. I mean, I want to say, what are you doing to today's India? Why can't we focus on making a better India for all, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, the lot, instead of fighting these old battles? When Vikram says that the wounds have not healed, you're not allowing them to heal. That's my problem. Let them heal. Let them heal. I remember a conversation with Shimon Peres, the former president of Israel, in Davos. This is more than 20 years ago. We were having dinner. It was a casual conversation. Now that he's passed away, I can reveal it. And he said to me, I hate history. I said, what? He said, history is my subject. What are you telling me, sir? He said, no, I hate history. I don't want my grandson to study history. I said, why? He says, the history only is going to make him dwell in the past, in real or imagined wrongs. I want him to focus on the future. Let him study technology. Let him study computers. I don't want him to study history. Now, this is from Israel, which is steeped in history. But I'm just saying, here is the kind of attitude that a modern, forward-looking state is seeking to encourage. And we, having encouraged it, having talked about science and IITs and AIMS and the race to space and all of that, we are now once again slipping back into using history as a battle axe to fight the imagined wrongs of today.
For example,
I'd lose my job, Dr. Tharoor, if history doesn't become
you won't lose your job. No, I wonder whether
history as history you should write. I'll read you. No, but history for today's political misuse is what I have a problem.
No, I wonder whether
history has always been the handmaiden of the ruler. It's nothing very special or unique that's happening now or today. I think time and time again it's the victor who writes the story, and that African saying that goes that
Chinua Achebe's famous line.
Yes, yeah.
Until the lions have their own.
Storyteller, it'll always glorify the
No, but look at
hunter.
it, Vikram. Look at it, Vikram, Dr. Tharoor, August 14th. In this Amrit Mahotsav year, the Prime Minister of the country says it should be looked at as Partition Horrors Remembrance Day. Do we want to rekindle the scars of the past, or do we want to look ahead? I mean, this is where it comes to it. Whether our politicians of the time are selectively interpreting history to suit their political ends.
Rajdeep, I think it was philosopher George Santana who had said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
George Santana.
Yeah, and so 2 million people dead, 15 million or so displaced, one of the largest displacements in human history, in at least the recent times. As I said, I don't know the political motivations of what might happen of that. But world over, when you have Holocaust museums, are they all celebrating the Holocaust? When in Israel, in Germany, or in the US, when people go to the Holocaust museum and see those horrors, even now, of what happened in those gas chambers, are they celebrating Hitler? Or is it a reminder that history gives to you that these excesses should never happen again? It should never be committed again. So I think...
That's a historian speaking, not a politician.
I said, luckily,
Shashi,
fortunately, I'm not.
Dr. Tharoor, you're a politician. Let's be honest. What is Partition Remembrance Day about? Remembering the horrors of partition.
Well, I think I was probably the first to tweet against this declaration by the Prime Minister that it should be marked as Partition Horrors Remembrance Day, because it seemed to me targeting specifically these healed wounds and scratching them. But having said that, I'm all in favor of memorializing what happened in partition. There's a very good partition museum in Amritsar. Let's have more. I mean, I've talked about memorializing the atrocities of colonialism. Not because today I want us to go and revolt against the Brits. That's over, that's history. But we should understand, we should, as I've said in talking about my book, I've said we must definitely forgive, but we must not forget. Now the problem is, here we have people who are not only prepared not to forget, who even want to revive memories, real or imagined, of what people have forgotten, and then instead of forgiving, want to punish the supposed descendants of those who perpetrated those wrongs.
That's your fear. That's your fear.
You cannot
That's
correct
your
the
fear.
wrongs of yesterday by creating new wrongs for tomorrow.
But Dr. Tharoor, if you want people to not to forget the horrors of colonialism, and you write a book about the darkness of that period, would you also encourage historians then to write about the period of medieval age or the age of the so-called invasions that took place during the Mughal rule or previously during the sultans, that there were these horrors that were committed and you should not forget them? Would you say that one is acceptable and one is not? Or would you say, forget one, because today if you forget one, you'll open up new scars, but don't forget what the colonials did, because there are no scars to be opened up there.
Dr. Tharoor famously argued for reparations from the British. We don't have reparations to take from Muhammad Ghazni, but the least reparation we can do for our national consciousness is to remember this.
But you can't remember, you can't remember it by demolishing a mosque and building a temple.
I mean, you're again bringing politics to me. So 80 million was the fall in the subcontinent's population between 1000 CE and 1525 with the end of the Delhi Sultanate. So these 80 million people, largely Hindus in this subcontinent, they just didn't drop down dead. Today we still have the Hindu Kush mountains. What is that Hindu Kush? It was a mountain of human skulls, of Hindu slaughter. So these are, and from 40,000 to 60,000 is the numbers spoken of the temples desecrated. Now you also have condescendingly Western historians who come down to us and tell us that Aurangzeb actually protected more temples than he demolished. And so he was a very, very, nice guy and so on. We know these kind of condescending historians who come and teach us what to be tolerant about and intolerant about. So obviously Hitler also could have probably massacred a lot more Jews. He didn't do it, so was he a saint for that? So I think these kind of perversions and it's, I think, an intellectual crime to subvert or subordinate the truth to political considerations, which happens on both sides. And to tell the truth as it is with a group of non-ideologically leaning historians, I think is the need of the hour to ensure that the story of India finally gets told to the future generations.
But why can't
and
it be
not
told
subsumed
by multiple voices, Vikram? Why
Yes.
can't we have... So you have a Gyanendra Pandey writing about example after example that he's dug up of Hindu-Muslim cooperation during these periods.
Sure.
And by all means also have a historian cataloguing all the misdeeds and the
Sitaram
temple
Goyal.
destruction and so on, whoever, Sitaram Goyal if you like. Let them both be there. My
That's
point
not
is,
allowed,
no, but
Dr.
at the
Tharoor.
moment
That is
you've
the
got a
problem.
situation where one point of view is in power and is imposing that point of view in everything from school textbooks in the states where they're ruling, down to the official national, I mean, even talking about this Horrors Remembrance Day is a very clear demonization
Honestly,
of one community.
on social media, I think this government's so-called supporters would actually castigate the government that they're not doing enough to change the textbooks, because in 7 years in power, and you had a former HRD minister who said we take pride in not a single line of the textbook has been changed. So I don't know what.
No, for example, no, 1 minute. We now have a film. No, we have a filmmaker, Mahesh Manjrekar, who wants to make a film on Godse. Announces the film on Gandhi Jayanti. And, obviously is sending out a message. You'll have Godse, as a hero trending as the top trend on social media.
Loonies, Rajdeep, there are loonies everywhere.
Isn't there a mainstreaming and a normalization of these loonies somewhere? I mean, who is a loony and who is not? Some of these loonies are in power. Some of these loonies are our MPs. I mean, how long are we going to call them loonies?
Yeah, we've had some MPs actually saying they wanted statues of Mahatma Gandhi replaced by statues of Godse. So it's not, Radhi was quite right, there is definitely a mainstreaming of points of view that would not have been considered, respectable to utter even behind closed doors.
But to credit where due, I think the Prime Minister himself came out and said he would never forgive the concerned MP from Bhopal who made those statements or whatever.
But she was made an MP before, when she was made an MP, she had already made statements about Godse. My point is, the moment you make her an MP, you're effectively saying it's okay. As long as you can win an election, you can say what you want, you can valorize Godse and demonize Gandhi. But Dr. Tharoor, on the flip side, this is about, at one level, competitive intolerances about the use of power. Take a look at in your home state of Kerala. Political controversy brewing over the inclusion of the works and thoughts of RSS ideologues like Golwalkar, Savarkar, Deen Dayal, Upadhyay.
And Balraj Madok.
And Balraj Madok. I don't know where Madok fitted into that. And there's a huge outcry. So the left is equally intolerant. Nobody, why should I not know about Savarkar or Golwalkar?
Exactly. That was my point.
Why can't there be history which is with multiple voices,
exactly,
read in an objective manner, non-ideologically? Is that at all possible? Or are we too hyper-polarized now to even appreciate it? People, somebody sent me a message when I said that I have Vikram on the show. Oh, he's the person who's whitewashing Savarkar for a new India. So you see, we seem so hyper-polarized at the moment. And he's not even read Vikram's book.
So my point would precisely be this: let's have multiple voices. I supported the proposal to include these RSS ideologues in the syllabus because it is only by reading them and understanding their thinking that you can decide where you stand in relation to them.
Will your party leadership support you on that?
No.
Or you'll be once again ostracized? Look at that bad boy Shashi
but I've
Tharoor.
already taken my public stand and I was isolated. But the point
You were isolated by your own party.
But look, I'm somebody who has quoted extensively from Savarkar and Golwalkar in my writings. So how can I deny others the privilege of reading the same sources that I read? From my point of view, I don't agree with them. But it's only by reading them that I know that I don't agree with them. So you cannot and should not deny college students, university students, the right to be exposed to a wide variety of views and come to their own conclusions. That applies to history, that applies to ideas. That's what education is supposed to be all about. It's to give you the equipment intellectually to discern, according ultimately to your own value choices, if necessary, your own ideology. I believe that it was wrong, and in the end, they have indeed proscribed those texts. I believe it was wrong to do so, and I have no hesitation in saying I'll stand up for academic freedom and intellectual freedom against even the sort of ideologues on my own side of the fence, because I genuinely believe in having as wide a range of materials, sources, and information. As I said to Vikram earlier, let's have both views about the same period. Let's read them. And that's not just both views. There are multiple views about many periods of Indian history in which there's not just one conclusion. The intelligent reader and the intelligent student should be exposed to and have an opportunity to see what everyone is reading, writing, arguing, and then make their own minds up. But then we'll have a better informed citizenry.
But is that possible? I ask you that, you're looking at an ideal situation where academic freedom, intellectual freedom exists. But it doesn't, in the hyper-polarized society where people are getting so sharply divided, them versus us, is it possible? Are we living in an illusory world, Dr. Tharoor, where it is simply not possible anymore to have these debates without polarizing society even further?
That's only because the ruling powers and the ruling establishment appear to have taken particular sides in this debate. If the government stayed out of the debate, if the government and the ruling party and their entire panoply of power, influence, media influence, all of that comes with it, if they stood back and said, let this be discussed amongst intellectuals, amongst historians, amongst journalists, that, I think, would be fine, and we can have all these views. I would love to read more of Vikram and read more of leftist historians. How does it matter? It's when the government has one point of view that appears to be the one that they are railroading to the consciousness of Indians that everyone gets alarmed and says, here, you're polarizing the country.
Sorry to say whataboutery here, but that's exactly what would have been said 25 years ago when you were in power. True. You see, that's the problem.
True. I was happily at the UN, so don't say true. But I take your point.
Dr. Tharoor is in a magnificent minority, who believes in this open-mindedness. That, as I said, history is a handmaiden of the ruler. So in the past, when ICHR was created and so on, I spoke about how even during the British time, you had space for an alternate view. Whereas, post-independence, it's a paradox that we do not have these alternate views to thrive. I mean, careers have been destroyed, fellowships denied, so many stories like this, only because you didn't toe a particular line. So every dog has its day. So some people are now looking back and saying, it's our time now. You can't grudge them that, saying, now we have to be fair to everybody and so on. Where were these virtues 20, 25 years ago? So now, in fact, as I said, people who are supportive of this government actually berate it for not doing enough to actually bring a civilizational consciousness or something, statement of history. So, in fact, they get the stick, I think, on both sides.
No, but it's got to be high quality. Let's be honest.
And so,
part of the problem is it's not just about junking the past. It's if you're going to rewrite history. Yeah. Please ensure that you do it with some element of integrity and quality. So I ask you, therefore, between so-called secularizing history and communalizing history, is there a middle ground that we can find?
Truthifying history, I guess. That is
the
truthifying history.
Truthifying. You're calling it truthifying history.
Truthifying Indian history and let people read what is the truth.
However inconvenient
it is, let us stare it in the face. Let's just get done with it. I think we have a very, very troubled past. And since, as I stated again, since we've not made peace with it, we will keep having these fissures emanating all the time, whether it is in Ayodhya, whether it is in some other place. If we had settled these for good, I think the problems would not arise.
Dr. Tharoor?
In one of my novels, Riot, I have a character, a foreigner, an American, saying to the Indian characters, the problem with your country is you have far too much history for you to be able to consume it. I mean, it's overflowing. You're all busy using history as a battle axe to hit each other with. And this character is somebody who's trying to sell a popular beverage in India. And he says, I don't care about your past. I'm only interested in your future and increasing my sales here. You guys should be thinking about the future too. And frankly, I have some sympathy with that point of view. I love reading history. I've enjoyed writing it as an amateur. I don't claim to be a historian as Vikram is. But I would say that history should belong to the past and to multiple understandings of the past. And Vikram says the truth. So if you look selectively at only the rape, the pillage, the destruction of temples, the forced conversions, you have one kind of truth about that period in northern India in particular. If you look only at incident after incident of Hindus going and worshipping, for example, Ghazi Mia in Bahrain is this fellow who was a Muslim warrior who's revered as a Hindu saint today. You've got people in many, many parts of India where if there was a natural calamity and a temple was destroyed, the local Muslims would come and rebuild it, and vice versa for a masjid. We've had so many examples like that are also present in our history. If you only look at that selectively, you'll have a different truth. And maybe if you read both sets of accounts, you'll arrive at a third truth. I feel we should let people have their own understandings, provided no one seeks to assert a monopoly of one version of the truth. That's where I would leave it. Let us let history remain contested for the past. But let us not bring those contests over into the present and thereby compromise our future.
Maybe we should have a film. Maybe we should have a film on Kabir instead of Aurangzeb.
Yeah, indeed. So
maybe we should have a film on bridge builders rather than a Godse.
Yeah.
There are any number of, have a great film on Vivekanand instead of a film on Godse. Have a film on Kabir instead of Ghazni. But maybe we live in a era whereas in Bajrangi Bhaijaan, the actor says कि प्यार बांटना बहुत मुश्किल है, नफरत फैलाना बहुत आसान. And I just wonder whether even history has got caught in these competitive hatreds of our time. I just wonder.
It has, Rajdeep, and I would agree with Dr. Tharoor there about these multiplicity of views. I've always held, as a historian, that it's that famous poem we read as children, the blind man and the elephant. Each blind man touches one part of the elephant and says the elephant looks like the trunk, the tail, the body, and so on. They're all right and they're all wrong as well. History is that. Each person looks at one aspect based on either biases or the evidences that are available to them and reconstructs. It's the sum of all the parts. So do not deny any part in the false miasma of contemporary politics, contemporary social cohesion, and so on. And as I said, de-hyphenate today's Muslims from these invaders of the past. Make new icons who actually represent that composite culture, who actually represent that peaceful version that you talk of, rather than, actually deny and have this negationism that, Aurangzeb was actually very secular, but, this...
The way to do that is to go back to the Constitution. The Constitution gives us a roadmap where we can all enjoy our own autonomy and be empowered as citizens of a free democratic republic.
True.
Let's do that and not, in fact, demonize people for what happened centuries before our republic was even born.
Let's leave it there, because we are 75 years into our independence, and 75 years is a good step to look forward rather than look at the past possibly with anger and certainly not with hatred. This country, as yesterday Thomas Friedman called it, is a miracle country, a country of great pluralities. Let's celebrate that diversity rather than somehow or the other demonize our past. And that's really what historians need to do, provide us with those multiple voices that reflect the diversity of this unique country. Thank you both very much for joining us. Vikram,
Thank you.
Sampath,
Thank you.
Shashi, Tharoor.
Thanks.
Thank you.